thank you again for just the opportunity to be a part of this investment in marriages. And can y'all just take a moment from right where you are, just clap and cheer for our host and hostess, our production team. There are people behind the scenes making this all possible. It is live. Can you just think about this for a minute? Wherever you are, we're getting to you in like minutes, maybe less than seconds, and just the capacity for all the smart people who have technology to allow this to happen. I cannot tell you how grateful I am for production teams, for video, so that we can invest well together as a community. And what a great partnership across the churches, and just the expertise that you're hearing from in these other sessions. Just heard an incredible encouragement from Carol, and I just want to spotlight my takeaway was just the thought about reaching toward. It is so powerful when one spouse sees the opportunity to reach toward the other in kindness and humility. And there's just an invitation as we kind of progress through our time together that we would communicate well, we would begin to navigate some of those places of conflict and maybe disagreement so that we can become the kind of couple that are really understanding what it is to walk intimately through our life together. This session, we're going to kind of quickly, we don't have a lot of time. We're going to quickly kind of navigate some topics, and ultimately we're going to be talking about sexual intimacy. What is it like for couples to discover rhythms and a safe space to be open and honest, to be available with each other, and to understand the rhythms of intimacy that are not only physical, but are emotional and spiritual as well. And so I just want to kind of point to this thought to kick things off. Emotional intimacy leads to physical intimacy, which ultimately thrives in the soil of spiritual maturity. Here's what I think we all want as a couple. I think we want the real kind of vibrant, intimate kind of relationship. I think we would love for our marriage to have this wonderful fruitfulness when it comes to physical intimacy. And I just want you to know it is in the soil of emotional and spiritual maturity that that's possible. To really share what I think we want to share physically, we have to understand it requires maturity and it requires emotional availability so that we can then share what we want to share physically. We're going to, yes, we will say sex in church. I'm actually standing in a church facility. It's okay to say sex in church. Scripture, it's there. It talks about it. It looks at what is healthy sexuality. What does it look like to live our life together, intimately bonded. Again, I'm going to be using words like safe and secure, that maturity is a significant part of that. And I just want to maybe kind of break the tension to just acknowledge we live in a sexualized culture. We live at a time where sexuality has been, it's become a matter of economics, and it is saturated around us. It is incredibly self-oriented, and there are so many things available to us that I think draw this conversation back to the importance of being emotionally mature and spiritually mature so we can be physically free. An interesting thing in some of my research over the years and talking, again, with couples and individuals in therapy, thinking about how to pastor this, and if I'm honest, thinking about my own life, how to become a healthy individual who is free to look at my wife and to pursue her in the places of intimacy. I was struck by some research put out by GQ magazine. Yes, this is a real deal. You can Google it. They talked about the damaging effects of pornography. And the reason I start there is to just acknowledge that there are a lot of ways we might try to express and kind of indulge our desire for physical intimacy and even kind of cultivating our own desires when it comes to things of a sexual nature. Our culture is saturated again with sex from movies and tabloids and just personal access with technology and smartphones. The access is rampant. And what was interesting is of all trustworthy sources, GQ magazine began to highlight the impact and really the damaging impact of something like pornography having on the individuals who look and view and the impact that it can take. So what I want us to kind of do is just acknowledge this is a very personal conversation. And uniquely, I can't see you, so I want you to trust my heart in it, that I recognize I've talked with enough people that all of our stories are coming from different places in regards to conversations of emotional intimacy and physical intimacy. I want to show you how uniquely connected these two things are. And we're going to do a simple mini date. And I want to just ask you to turn toward your spouse. I don't want you to talk. I don't want you to do anything except give each other eye contact. And I want you to pay attention, to just lock in, really look at their eyes. I mean, the eyes are the window to the soul. Give full attention to the eyes of your spouse. And I'm going to have you do this for a minute. 60 seconds, uninterrupted. And what I want you to pay attention to is the emotional experience you are having inside. Ready, go. So how did that make you feel? Maybe a little bit of an extended mini date for us there. But what I want you to notice is that the simple act of just physically locking in eyes draws that emotional experience. What I've seen throughout this kind of exercise time and time again is we are actually not prone to feeling comfortable the longer that we go. But it draws us to each other. It begins to create a space that's more intimate and connected. And so what I want us to notice is that that quality soil for quality connection requires time and care. That intimacy is something that requires attention and care. We have to cultivate it. We have to attend to it. And this is not about speed. This is not, oh, how quickly can we become intimate? This is about surrender and sacrifice day in and day out that leads us to the kind of interaction that we want. So here are a couple thoughts about how to cultivate the emotional intimacy so that our physical intimacy can thrive. The first is we have to be available and aware. This is something that Carol highlighted so eloquently in the breakout session that we just had, that we must become emotionally mature people who share our lives openly with each other. I love the invitation from Jesus to love your neighbor as yourself. What's interesting is the way I love myself is the standard for how I'll love others. So I need to cultivate a rhythm of self-awareness and self-understanding so I can learn how to love myself where I am, so I'm more prone and practiced to love my spouse exactly where they are. We have to grow in our understanding and love for ourselves, or we'll be stunted in our capacity to love our spouse well. Becoming available and aware of myself is maybe a practice of journaling or going on a walk and reflecting. We have to build a self-reflective rhythm and pattern of living so we actually know what to share and how to connect with our spouse. As I reflect on where I am, I now know what to share so they can connect with me where I really am in my experience of life. I have to become open and honest. You know, this is actually about humility. Being open and honest with our spouse is the practice of humility that says, I'm not going to hold things back, but I'm going to come and offer who I am to you. I think what's really interesting here is that as we cultivate this idea of being open and honest emotionally, it will actually allow us to step more fully into those spaces and those kind of sacred spaces of physical intimacy. We're cultivating how it is to be naked and unashamed in our emotion and not only in our flesh and in our bodies. Ultimately, I'm resisting the urge to hide. I'm resisting the urge to hide. The more confident I am that my spouse is safe and it's a place of security and it's a place that I can come being completely open and completely honest, what I begin to do is push back against the urge inside of each of us to hide for self-protection. There's this long-running narrative in Scripture that one of the first things that we did in a space of kind of broken relationship when Adam and Eve kind of succumbed to a moment of emotional immaturity is they hid from God. One of the things that I think cultivates intimacy in our relationship with our spouse is that we learn how to be open and available to God and open and available to our spouse, and we resist the urge to hide. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go on a mini date, and I want you to practice becoming more present to each other and more available to each other. And on this mini date, I want you to remember a memory where your spouse did something that caused you to feel loved, cared for, or valued. Remember a special moment in your history together when you shared something of value that you felt loved and cared for. Listen to each other and experience being open and honest about a positive time of connecting, and notice that you probably feel more connected in real time at this moment. Enjoy your mini date. Well, I hope that this kind of practice of remembering is something you'll do regularly together. Now, I know you're kind of thinking like, I thought this was the conversation about sexual intimacy, and here we are talking about emotion and memories, and can't we go ahead and get to it? I will just tell you, these sorts of rhythms and practices will help your sexual intimacy be even better. We have to learn how to be patient and kind with each other. If you know how to be patient and kind outside of the bedroom or the shower or wherever you might be enjoying each other's company, you will learn how to be that way with each other. You'll be creating a more confident, safe, and secure bond where you can be available to each other. Patience and kindness are so essential when we talk about intimacy, and I would say especially sexual intimacy. We have to go back to the basics over and over and over again. Love is patient and kind. I think these are foundational qualities in a healthy sexual rhythm for a married couple. And sacrifice and surrender. You know, it's interesting, in Ephesians 5, there's some encouragement to the church there about how to live a life pleasing to God. And the first thing it says is imitate God, who loved us and sacrificed for us. See, I think in our intimacy, in our marriage here on earth, we have to imitate God in being those who are committed to love and sacrifice. And as you read further on in that letter, it says this: submit to one another out of reverence for God. Physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, is at its healthiest when it is rooted in the soil of sacrifice and surrender, when there's a humility about it that shows patience and kindness. And if you want to experience healthy physical intimacy, I think you need to do a couple things to build up towards this. First is you need to encourage each other. Build each other up. Practically, you want your relationship outside of the bedroom to be saturated in positive connection. Some wonderful research that came out about master couples regularly experience 20 positive interactions to every 1 negative. And even in the midst of conflict, when they're colliding with each other, they've practiced building each other up so much. Even in those moments, master couples are at a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions and words and kind of that moment. And so I would just tell you, kind of out of what the Gottman Institute is finding with couples relationships, and they are the foremost researchers on couples connections, is to be positive, build each other up. Learn to identify and share your emotional experience. And I'll just tell you, for men and women alike, we have to practice this so we can be attuned to what we're experiencing and share that with each other. And then here's the big thing. You have to prioritize quality time with intentional planning. You know, what's interesting is I would just tell you, really intimate moments do not just spontaneously happen. Yes, you might have a spontaneous moment here or there, but to maintain sexual intimacy that's vibrant and loving and kind for the long haul, you have to be intentional. Because again, emotional intimacy cultivates the soil for physical intimacy, which means we need to invest way more than what we might think. And so I just want you to think about your physical relationship. Is it what you want? Have you ever kind of gotten real comfortable in talking about your sex life with your spouse? Have you ever kind of found some really healthy kind of views on how do we talk about this and how do we know we're doing well or not? Well, even in my time, you know, getting a degree in this and kind of being trained in how to sit with couples, I will tell you, I've struggled to find how to have a healthy framework for what is healthy and what should each couple kind of set as like a standard for their intimacy, especially when it comes to sexual intercourse and how to connect and share who you are with one another. Well, I want to read to you what's a little bit of a longer quote from the book A Lifelong Love by Gary Thomas. As I was reading this book, I found what was the most helpful paragraph I personally had read that gave language to what I have found to be incredibly meaningful for couples. So if you will, I'm going to go ahead and read this quote and just take a moment to kind of let it sink in and think about where it maybe aligns with what you've thought and where it maybe confronts and calls you maybe to some transformation. The difficulty of maintaining long-term sexual interest can actually be a blessing. Achieving sexual satisfaction will all but force you to develop the same relational skills that will serve all aspects of marriage. You're going to have to be humble, to hear hard words, and to learn to put someone else's needs first. You're going to have to learn how to understand who your partner is and what he or she truly desires and doesn't desire. You'll need plenty of courage, as it's easier to just stay quiet in this area than pursue true intimacy. To be as naked in your conversation and desires as you are in each other's arms. You will have to grow in empathy and patience and generosity. As I read that, I just thought, man, this calls me past a moment that on average lasts 3 minutes or so. This calls me into a way of being for the rest of my days in how we love and cherish each other. how do we understand what healthy physical intimacy is as a couple? So I want to check in with you, and I want to ask you a very specific question. What measurement do you use as a couple to determine physical intimacy health? What measurement do you use as a couple to determine physical intimacy health? Think about it for just a second. Here's my guess. My guess is that you use frequency. How frequently do we have sex? How frequently do we have intercourse? It is the quantity of sex that our culture has told us is kind of the arbitrary measurement for what is appropriate. So let me ask you, what is the average couple, healthy couple, how many times a week are they having sex? No, seriously, what do you think? Is it once? Twice? 7? 4 times a day? Okay, I'm joking. It's okay, you can laugh a little bit. It's all right. You actually don't know. I've been in rooms with 100 people, and I've asked this question. We kind of think we're supposed to say maybe twice a week, plus or minus, depending on age of kids and life stage and how tired we are and how much we travel and if there's other kind of contributing factors. Here's the bottom line. Your rhythm of sexual intimacy should not be held against any other couple. The standard of frequency is not helpful for us. It really is about the quality of our care for one another in our own marriage. In our own marriage. The quality of connection and care is essential for physical intimacy to thrive. If I said on average it's 3 times a week, then every couple who's now having sex maybe less than 3 times a week might feel bad. And anybody who's over thinks they're overachieving, but it's all arbitrary because you could be having sex every day and not be healthy. You could be having sex once a month and be dialed in and be incredibly intimate with each other. Because our physical intimacy is way more than intercourse. Some language that might help you navigate this as a couple is because here's what I know. The only 2 people who have an idea about this that matter are the spouses in a marriage together. And the only time this is actually not so problematic is when they have the same idea of how much sex we should be having. When they have the same number, their numbers are aligned, and then they have to work out about how they care for each other. The moment one spouse says we should have 3 times a week and another spouse says twice a week, you now have a disparity and somebody is going to be disappointed. And usually both people are more prone to disappointment. I was in a training with some language that came up that was really helpful, and what we would love to see is the desire. Let me see if I can get that out. This is live. That was me stuttering, just to remind you, is desire. We love when we have desire for each other, and it aligns, and it's fireworks, and it's wonderful, and we both feel satisfied, and maybe we both experience orgasm, and then it's really good. What's interesting is the amount of things life is throwing at you. This is maybe not the most common way we experience intercourse. And so then what do? Well, when we feel pressure, we might feel like it's our duty because we have a responsibility to honor marriage, and so we have to have intercourse. Does that sound thrilling to you? Does that sound like freedom? Well, there's demand, which I think is actually worse than duty because we're feeling pressured or coerced that I'm demanding sex from my spouse. Well, there's this powerful place of commitment and connection where we can make a decision. Because here's the thing, if we only operate out of desire, then what we are stuck in is a place that we have to always align and have the same desire at the same moment. And life is just not that way. We're different people. So what we want to do is we want to embrace this quality of relating to each other that Gary Thomas so eloquently writes in his book, that we have to maintain the kind of relational skills to be empowered in our choice to love each other. And you will share plenty of desire if you're learning how to decide how to be intimate with each other emotionally and spiritually so that physically you can as well. Here's how I like to say it, and this is the best language that I have come up with in my own journey so far. We must move from a selfish sexuality to a surrendered sexuality. I have to submit my desires sexually to my spouse and surrender them at her feet and say, I am yours. The culture that we live in teaches us to live very selfishly in regards to our sexuality. My body is mine, my desires are mine, and I deserve having everything that I desire and my needs being met. It's me, me, me. Marriage calls us to surrender that and entrust ourselves to our spouse and make room for them as much as we desire for there to be room for us. We must move from selfish sexuality to surrendered sexuality. I fully give myself to my spouse, which means I will honor and care and I'll entrust myself to them, that my sexuality is less important than my bond with them, that I'll maintain the boundaries of commitment and connection to them in our sexual intimacy. Here's what it means. Love is patient. When I spend time with couples in premarital counseling, what I tell them is we have to learn how to wait before marriage because we will still wait in marriage. Once you're married, you have to know how to wait for your spouse because there might be nights where you want to have sex and your spouse is not ready to share that sort of moment in that moment. And we can still maintain intimate connection and we can wait patiently for our spouse because they are more important than a moment of intercourse. Love is patient and kind. Love is patient and kind. Sexual intimacy is strengthened through vulnerability. Let me just ask you a question. Can you hold hands longer than you can have sexual intercourse? Faux show. Yes. It's amazing. You can hold hands, and guess what? Holding hands is part of physical intimacy. Being near each other, locking eyes, a gentle kiss. Sexual intimacy is more than sexual intercourse. When we engage a conversation and a connection and we're available to each other and we're not hiding but we're sharing this conversation, we begin to grow and we expand the ways that we can connect intimately. Our culture sometimes pushes a narrative at us that it shrinks what sexual kind of fulfillment is, but I think in the invitation of Scripture and the invitation of friendship and the invitation to reach toward each other, we begin to expand what our intimacy is because it is emotional, it is spiritual, and it is physical. And when we can begin to be more honest and available to each other, we will experience physical connection that includes intercourse and holding hands and being creative and giving each other eye contact and discovering that it is more about surrendered sexuality than it is selfish sexuality. And what I do realize is that your story might have real kind of moments where boundaries have been violated. Wounds have been kind of experienced not because of your own choosing. What I realize is that the reason it's hard to be vulnerable sometimes is because we have had that vulnerability taken from us. For couples who maybe find this to be a challenging place, this is where you want to have a mentor. Maybe you want to reach out to a certified sex therapist or to a licensed professional counselor or a marriage therapist and allow somebody to come in and help you navigate these conversations. We need to be like the otters. We need to hold hands. We need to start where we can to cultivate intimacy. And I will tell you this, when you honor the boundaries that your spouse is saying, this is how far I'm willing to go, honoring boundaries will build trust. And as you build trust, you will cultivate the intimate connections of emotional security that will allow your physical intimacy to grow over time and throughout the different seasons that come. There are normal seasons where, intercourse frequency might decline because you have sleepless nights. Maybe you're navigating health concerns. Maybe you're navigating a pressure at work, and so you actually don't have the quality time you need. In those seasons, if you're talking, if you're honest, if you're open and you're available, you can make decisions that keep you intimately connected. And you can know that your waiting is with love, because love requires patience. Love requires sacrifice. And I think the more our spouse knows we are willing to be patient and sacrifice physically, our intimacy will blossom and will carry us through those times. And just to go on record, sometimes the sacrifice is not only in the person who's waiting, but the loving sacrifice is in a spouse who decides to be physically available, even in a season of fatigue, because they are communicating, I love you, and I'm available to you, and I'm caring for you. We need to receive that with great care. It is not about frequency or quantity. It is about quality and being fully available to each other. When we miss the mark, we can choose repair because we continue to surrender and sacrifice. When we miss the mark, we can choose humility and we can express our desire and we can patiently wait. Do you see these themes weaving together? We reach toward, we communicate, we sacrifice. We become the kind of person who, in humility, will share our desires, but will be willing to make decisions to be patient and kind. I'm going to read it again. Achieving sexual satisfaction will all but force you to develop the same relational skills that will serve all aspects of marriage. You will need plenty of courage, as it's easier to just stay quiet in these areas than pursue true intimacy. To be as naked in your conversation and desires as you are in each other's arms. You will have to grow in empathy and patience and generosity. I realize what we've done is just opened a conversation. We've invited you as a couple to step into what is real and what is true for you at this moment. My guess is it's the selfish desires that we each have that sometimes create the biggest barriers to our full, true intimacy. But if we can begin to be open and we can share desire with one another that's rooted in a soil of patience and kindness. So I'm going to give you a few minutes, about 8 minutes or so, to just turn toward each other and say, how are we doing? What would we desire? And what I want you to make sure you do is communicate your willingness to be patient and kind as you consider how you might grow and see your physical intimacy thrive along with your emotional intimacy and your spiritual intimacy, so that you can say yes to being a mature person who will walk with your spouse for the days and months and years ahead to share true intimacy. Hey, it's been a real honor to get to share some thoughts with you so far in the conference. My prayer for you is that you will grow closer, that you will learn how to sacrifice more fully, that you'll learn how to surrender your selfishness so that you can share with your spouse the thing you long for, which is an intimate connection. Turn toward each other, be open and available, and take a few minutes to talk about your sexual intimacy and your emotional intimacy, because they are uniquely bonded together in your relationship. Connect with each other, and thanks for listening with great kindness.